As someone who has just finished their first novel, shameless plug here, Upon This Rock it's called, I can tell you it's the world's loneliest art form, writing. Well, our next guest knows all about that. Writer and writing teacher, Christopher De Lorenzo. Welcome.
Thank you.
You know, you got to shamelessly plug your own work nowadays because
Sure.
the days of sending a novel to a publisher and having it published and, you know, instantly millions of people see it, those days are gone, yes?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's quite a journey from just to get a novel written, but especially to get someone to read it or to get an agent. Mm-hmm. It's hard to do, and I think people expect people to self-publish more now because it's so much harder to get published through a big publisher.
Do you think that the stigma of self-publishing has kind of gone away? Because it was there for a while, 10 years ago.
I don't think it's gone yet, honestly, I don't. But I think it's changing a lot because the industry's changing so much. People are getting published when they have a name, they have a platform. And of course there's new writers all the time. I mean, you see new writers published all the time. But it's smaller, it's more challenging, and I think people are self-publishing more and more. And they're self-publishing some really great books, some beautifully designed books.
Now, you've got 3 novels in manuscript form, and you teach. Yeah. Which do you enjoy doing more, teaching others to write or writing yourself, and which is harder?
Well, I think I really love them both. I think it's harder for me to write on my own, actually. I mean, I do, of course. Every writer has to. But the reason I started the writing groups and the reason I build writing communities is because I was always interested in how writers got past that sense of isolation. I mean, it really all started because I was curious about how people in their acknowledgement pages of their books thanked writing groups. And I always thought, who are these writing groups and how do you get in one?
Yeah. You start one.
Well, yeah, I mean, that wasn't exactly the way it went. But yeah, I was interested. I was an undergrad in Massachusetts, in Western Massachusetts, a little school called Hampshire College. And we had to create our own program and do our own, like a mini master's thesis. There's our senior project. It's a major project. You did independent research. And there was a woman nearby who led writing groups, and I was really interested in what she did. So I interviewed her, and she invited me as a guest, and she introduced me to the method that I have adapted for my own workshops now.
So you also teach rhetoric. That interests me because I jokingly said in the open, is this a lost art? And sometimes I think it is, especially in our political landscape. I mean, every interview I've done today, we're taping this a week after the presidential election, has been about what is the impact on you as a writer, an artist, a plumber, whatever. Yeah. We all have an opinion. But something to me that has been missing in political dialogue over the last few years is rhetoric, high-sounding words, serious conversation. Is rhetoric a lost art?
Well, after this recent election, I'm very concerned about the way that people responded to, the kind of speech that came out. I think that rhetoric itself is argument, and it's there are devices you use. And what I teach at USF is I teach freshman composition, but it's in the rhetoric and language department. So we're teaching academic writing, persuasive writing with a specific focused argument that you develop. And that takes, logic and reasoning and finding credible sources. And I think what's been upsetting to me about what's happened in the most recent election is that it seems like words don't matter as much to people anymore. It's okay to say something that's totally untrue, totally unfounded. It's okay to say something that's hate speech. I mean, I am a little worried about the way that critical thinking and language are starting to become disconnected, that you don't have to think so much about what you say. You can just say it, and that's who you are, and that's freedom of speech. And I mean, rhetoric is really about thinking about how you focus on getting your point across and getting people to understand your position. So I mean, I've never really thought about that question, but I guess I am a little concerned about it being a dying art.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the age of Kim Kardashian's, butt photos, I mean, do we have a need for critical thinking?
Yeah. I mean, I think we need it even more now than ever. I mean, I think partially it's not encouraged in schools. A lot of what happens with my students, I'm working with a lot of students who've had, pretty solid educations, but there's a real spectrum of where they've come from, and sometimes they're the first person in their family to have gone to college. But even so, even when they've had, pretty solid education and they write well, a lot of people say to me, oh, how are your students? Are they terrible writers? They're not mostly. They're very good writers, but they do have trouble claiming a position and having conviction. I do think a lot of the way that we've taught people to write is, here's what I want you to do, here's the formula, plug it in, and, you know, and then you might get an A. But I ask them, like, what do you want to say? What are you angry about? What do you want to see change? And a lot of times they're just like, what are you talking about? Like, no one's ever asked me that. I don't know what my opinion is. And one semester I had a young woman say, you know, pen poised, she just said, tell me what my thesis should be. And I said, well, your thesis is your idea. And she said, well, I don't know what I want to write yet. And I said, well, go out and find out, you know? So I think pushing people to ask themselves, what do they think and feel? What do they know? I mean, I think we need more of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Has social media made it more difficult to teach a serious writing course? I mean, there's all this. There's all this reflection going on now. Just this week in the press, people saying, "Well, I'm not going to post this story anymore because it's not true." But I don't know. Does that mean irony is dead? I mean, I go back and forth between saying, are false news stories false news, or are they satire?
Right. Well, I mean, if satire is done well, you know that you're in on the joke. You know what I mean? If you're watching someone do a parody, or you know, someone's being satirical, then usually you're in on the joke, and it feels comfortable. I mean, they may push buttons, but you feel like you're part of the audience. But I think when you're being duped, when you're being given false information, I mean, part of it, I think, on both sides, right, whether you're conservative or liberal, is that you are getting information, you're seeking out information that's going to make you feel better about the position you take on that subject. So, you know, I'm sure I've read things I have sometimes found articles and then done a little research and found out that they were not correct or they were not credible. But I think that's the step that's sometimes missing, you know, is that being inquisitive that way. I guess we come back to critical thinking, you know.
Right.
Am I being duped is a question I ask myself sometimes. But, you know, I also get duped because I trust certain, you know, I trust certain stories because I want them to be true. Right, right. You know?
So is your writing autobiographical? Of course, that's the question everyone asks a writer because, in a sense, it's all autobiographical.
Yeah.
You know, one of my favorite things that any writer ever said about writing was, I believe it was Ann Beattie, who said, only write what only you can write.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think a writer's first novel is often, if you're writing fiction, is often autobiographical, more directly. I mean, I know that some people, you know, they read a headline in the news, or they see someone on the street talking on the phone, and a story unfolds for them, and then they can really invent it from there. But I think there's always some part of fiction that's informed by memory, you know, experience, dreams, relationships. I mean, the last manuscript I wrote was inspired by two people that I had met, but they became characters. I didn't know them very well, and they became characters in my book. And it was the first time I wrote something that did really feel like it wasn't based on people that I knew really well. It wasn't autobiographical in that way. And yet, the themes I'm writing about are always themes that are really important to me, which is relationship and love, and the way that people help you to see yourself, you know, hold up a mirror for you, the way that we don't see ourselves. I guess I write about identity a lot, and love.
So tell me what is on your computer at the moment?
What's on my computer?
Yeah, what are you writing?
Well, I just finished. It's funny that you brought up self-publishing, because I'm actually working on self-publishing just a small book. It's about 100 pages. It's a memoir cookbook. So it's 6 essays about people that have taught me how to cook, and 51 recipes.
So it's Christopher meets Julia, or whatever that was. Julie meets Julia.
Yeah. I mean, I'd read a lot of memoir cookbooks, and I'd always really liked them. But what happened was, in some of the groups, I started writing about people that had taught me to cook. And initially, that was my parents. My dad was a good cook, as well as my mom. But I'm also good friends of mine. I have a friend who's a really good baker. And so we've just, you know, we've had half-an-hour conversations about, like, the perfect chocolate cake. So it turned into a book, and I wanted to publish it myself because I wanted to give it as a gift. It was something. Yes. Yeah. So poetry. I write free verse. Mostly what I publish is free verse poetry, and I've been working on some new poems, and I'm writing. I feel like I'm writing more gay poems, actually, writing more poems with gay themes and about gay people. So I've got a couple of those that I'm working on right now, trying to revise, and I also write very short first-person pieces in my workshops, and I publish them on my blog, which is linked to my website. And they're mostly just examples of how the writing prompt that I give, the exercise I give in the workshop, can be, how you can develop something from that.
Right, right. In our last minute, talk to me about when you've got a student there, you've got 3 or 4 or 5 students, what is it about one that makes you think that's going to be a good writer?
Well, I think there's a certain alertness about a student. I mean, there's always a student that you, especially early on in the class or the workshop, that you feel is really checked in. They really get it. They get where you're coming from, and they're curious about what you're saying. But I think also the way that they ask questions or use words. You can tell when someone really loves words and is interested in words. And also truth. I think people, if you're a truth seeker, it helps you to be a critical thinker and to go deeper into a piece of writing.
Right.
Yeah.
Any advice for newbie writers out there that are watching this? Scared to put pen to paper or finger to...
to keyboard?
Yeah.
I think find a group if you can that'll help to encourage you and support you along the way. That's been building writing communities outside of... I do that in my classrooms at USF too, but what I do at home is really build communities. And what I've done with my gay men's group is try to create a safe place for people to explore ideas that they have. So find other writers to work with. That could be, you and some other people in a cafe once a week or once a month, or it could be something that you go to, a class you go to, a workshop you go to like mine. Just find a way to connect to other writers. That you inspire each other, you help each other again to see what is in the writing when you share it, and you have a sense of not being isolated in it, because some of what you do as a writer has to be, a lot of what you do as a writer has to be in isolation.
Well, who knows? Yeah. Maybe you'll see me at one of those groups. I may come out.
I would love that. Please, yes.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
We've been speaking with Christopher De Lorenzo about rhetoric, writing, and the arts thereof. Next up, we're going to learn what's hot in the Russian River. We'll be right back.